The cost of living crisis doesn't need any introduction from me, but the scale of what's to come with electricity prices certainly does. Just 18 months ago, we were paying around about 17 pence per kilowatt hour on household electricity prices. This year, just before September, we're paying closer to 30 pence per kilowatt hour. And that price is causing widespread difficulties. So I think you need to brace yourself for the graph that I'm just about to show you. As of this video, electricity prices for the winter of 2022 are trading at around £700 per megawatt hour. That price has been rising every single week since the beginning of June. And it's not looking like there are any signs to suggest that the prices will stop rising. Now, the vast majority of the electricity that you consume is purchased through these future trading prices. Now, once you've added on network costs and operating costs and added on your VAT and a small profit margin, you end up with a retail price which is probably going to end up this winter at around £1 per kilowatt hour. Consider the fact just a few weeks ago people were suggesting that 50 pence per kilowatt hour was going to be catastrophic for people in this country. £1 per kilowatt hour is probably going to end up being a humanitarian crisis. And you don't know it yet because it's still in the post. Now, my name is Anthony and I've been running a 9 kilowatt solar panel array up here in Aberdeenshire. I've got plenty of coverage about that in previous videos, but today what I want to talk to you about is how we're going to exit this cost of energy crisis which is affecting the United Kingdom. Now, there's been plenty of talk about government payouts to households. No doubt there'll be plenty more talk about that in the coming days and weeks in the general media. What I want to talk about are what investments are happening, in particular into the electricity industry, because energy investments are the only long-term solution to getting out of this cost of energy crisis that we've got. If we look at where our electricity has come from in the last 10 years, you'll see that the balance of electricity has shifted dramatically. Coal has largely disappeared, and it's been replaced not with wind turbines, but with gas turbines. Gas is dominating electricity supply right now, and it is the villain of the piece when it comes to electricity prices. There's no doubt about it though, wind and solar are starting to pack a punch. But you can see since the pandemic, that punch has stalled somewhat. A lot of that has been due to the removal of subsidies, and the pandemic has also stalled construction. But the question is what lies in the future? Well, last September, I introduced my viewers to the government's Renewable Energy Planning database. So now I'm downloading the July 2022 report, 13 months after the June 2021 review, and I've crunched some numbers. Since June 2021, only 1.3 gigawatts of new nameplate capacity has been added to the grid across all renewable sectors. It's not a lot, and it certainly doesn't move the price needle much this winter. However, since June 2021, there's now over 25 gigawatts of nameplate capacity added to the database, and 14 gigawatts is for wind and solar alone. Now, for a bit of context, there's over 49 gigawatts of capacity in the planning system already for wind and solar alone. This is where planning isn't withdrawn, refused, expired, or where the site is now operational. In other words, over half of the applications have happened in just 1 year, and it's up from 30 gigawatts last year. This is a really encouraging sign that things are stepping up. Now, these plans take 2 to 4 years to get onto the grid, but once they do, then that will make a big impact. But it's not just large-scale projects which are seeing accelerated investments into renewable energy. Residential installations are also seeing renewed surge in domestic solar being installed on people's rooftops. We're now seeing installation rates equaling the numbers that we saw in the feed-in tariff years from 2011 through to 2015. Now that's great news for the country, but that investment is being constrained by supply chain shortages. Now in my previous videos I talked about the particular constraints in relation to polysilicon, but we've got other constraints as well, more closer to home. We've got a lack of electricians needed to install solar panels on our rooftops. So when I was getting a quote for my battery installation, I approached a number of suppliers. One of the suppliers was perfectly frank with me. He said there were 30 other people in the queue in front of me waiting for a quote for a renewable energy installation project on their house. So right now, if you don't have solar panels, you've got three options. You can either sit there and do nothing and suffer a cost of living crisis, or you can sit in a queue and suffer a cost of living crisis for the time being, but know that things will probably get better later on. Or you can roll up your sleeves, learn some electrics and do it yourself. Now on that matter, it's very clear to me what careers advice I'd be willing to give to someone who asks for it. I think joining the electrical industry is a really great thing to do at this moment. If we look at final energy demand, final energy consumption statistics from the Office of National Statistics, you'll see that electricity actually accounts for a very small proportion of all the energy which is consumed in this country. It's about 20%. And we've got petroleum consumption and natural gas consumption accounting for the rest of it. And that's not natural gas consumption which is used to run gas power stations. This is natural gas consumption which is used to heat your homes. All of that in a net zero environment needs to be replaced with electricity. So the scale of the challenge needed to ramp things up is really very apparent to everyone. And I think if there's anything to say in this video which is really positive, is that the energy industry, in particular electricity industry, is probably going to be really hungry for people right now. So what advice do I have for people with solar panels this winter, especially those people who have batteries or are considering batteries? Well, you are probably aware of the Octopus Go tariff, where you get the nice cheap price for a few hours each night time. And no doubt that will become more expensive, but have a look at the Octopus Agile price. On the face of it, it looks horrendous. I'm paying 35 pence per kilowatt hour pretty much all the time. New customers are now going to be paying 55 pence per kilowatt hour as a price cap. But that's just one side of the story with Octopus Agile. The other side of the story is that the export prices have gone to absurdly high levels. In the last 2 weeks, the export prices have been above the import prices for electricity. To put that in context, it is cheaper for me to charge up my car at night time, importing electricity from the grid, than it is to charge up my car with solar panels. Because what that will do is that it will mean that those solar panels can then be used to export that electricity straight to the grid. And I can actually make a bit more money that way. It's absurd, but you can apply the same principle to batteries. You can charge up your battery at 35 pence per kilowatt hour and then export it. This week, I think today, 55 pence per kilowatt hour is the asking price. It's crazy. And you can export it straight away. Now, if you take a pumped hydro scheme or any other energy storage business, they take a cheap price at one time of the day and then they export it at a more expensive price later on. And that's perfectly reasonable. You're balancing out the difference between supply and demand through the course of a day. But what you're doing here is that you're taking advantage of a market distortion where prices are capped. You're buying electricity at an artificially cheap price and exporting it at a much more expensive natural price. And that is perfectly legal. Is it permitted within the Octopus Energy terms and conditions? I haven't read them recently. I'll put them on this screen. But from what I recall, there is nothing to stop you doing it. So it raises the question, is it the moral and ethical thing to do? Well, if you think it is, try saying that to an angry mob on Facebook who are all unable to pay their bills. The idea of buying a commodity and then reselling it at an inflated price is nothing new. It happens all the time. It's one thing to buy a commodity at a time of surplus when it's cheap and then sell it at a time when supply is constrained. You're actually helping things out in that regards, and you're making a profit in the first place. But it's quite another thing to buy a commodity at an artificially cheap price and then sell it straight back into the same market at a much more expensive price. That's not helping anyone at all. So regardless of legal, contractual or ethical considerations, are there practical reasons why you shouldn't use this to take advantage of distorted market prices? For one thing, the energy you put into this battery is going to be greater than the energy you get out of it. This has got a nameplate capacity of 94%, but that's charging up from solar, that's DC to DC charging. When it's 80 to DC charging, your efficiency, your round trip efficiency is going to be lower. So you've got to overcome those losses. And then in addition to that, you've got electrochemical wear and tear in a battery. Each time you do a charge cycle on this, the life expectancy of the battery will be reduced. So you've got to consider the depreciation of the battery in this kind of field. But just to take you back to the first graph in this video, the export prices for Octopus Agile, I reckon, will probably hit 70 pence per kilowatt hour this winter. So I can take the difference between the import and export price, which is 35 pence per kilowatt hour, and I can export 9 kilowatt hours per cycle. And this is good for 4 hours per cycle, so I can get 6 cycles per day, and that's about 2,000 cycles in a year. And the numbers I've got is that it will give me a revenue of £3.15 per cycle. And what's the revenue per year? £6,300 per year, assuming that kind of price regime sticks. £6,300 multiplied by 10 years, applied battery degradation, you're looking at £45,000 of revenue. I'm making the assumption here that the 10-year unlimited cycle warranty is strong enough to support that kind of operation. I've got a feeling though that the warranty for this battery has got a few get out clauses, and I will end up with a battery which will reach its more realistic cycle life. Bear in mind, this is nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistry. It doesn't last anywhere near as long as lithium iron phosphate in the real world. So I am relying on the warranty for this battery. But everything I've talked to you about so far can apply to almost any other battery. Energy is such a fundamental force in any economy. It sits right above the 3 fundamental pillars of any economy: labour, land and capital. Without energy, our society is just banging rocks together. So I want to end this video on a positive tone. The message I have out there is to have hope, find opportunity in this crisis, and definitely consider joining the electrical industry if you haven't already done so. Now, I do have plans for more videos coming up. Hopefully the next one is going to be part 2 of my battery bank commissioning saga. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you again very soon.